You already know the Amish live differently, but what most people miss is why their kitchens cost a fraction of what yours does, and it has nothing to do with growing your own food or living off the grid. Most people assume Amish frugality is about sacrifice. Less comfort, less convenience, less of everything. But the truth is the opposite. The Amish don't spend less because they have less. They spend less because they know more. Specifically, they held on to 12 food habits that the rest of America quietly abandoned, and every single one of those habits puts money back in your pocket. I've gone through the research, the cookbooks, the first-hand accounts from Amish communities across Pennsylvania and Indiana, and I'm going to walk you through all 12. Some of them you can start today. A few of them are going to change the way you think about your kitchen entirely. And if you want to go deeper into ancestral kitchen practices like these, everything I recommend lives at ancestralbeauty.shop. I'll mention it again at the right moment. Let's start with the one that surprises people the most. Here's the thing about lard that nobody talks about in the context of money. A bottle of good olive oil costs $8, $9, $10 and lasts maybe 3 weeks in an active kitchen. A bottle of avocado oil is worse, and most people go through 2-3 of those a month without thinking twice about it. The Amish never had that problem, not because they cooked less, they cooked far more for far more people, but because they never switched away from the fat that was already there. Lard, rendered pork fat, the same fat that American kitchens used for the better part of 2 centuries, right up until the 1950s, when the vegetable oil industry convinced an entire generation that animal fat was the enemy. Here is what that switch actually cost us, not just in health terms, though pasture-raised lard is genuinely rich in vitamin D and has a smoke point higher than most cooking oils, but in dollars. A single hog yields several pounds of fat that can be rendered at home for almost nothing. Bought from a local farmer or butcher, lard costs a fraction per pound of what any specialty oil costs per bottle. It stores for months in a cool pantry. It makes pie crust flakier, biscuits more tender, and fried eggs taste like something worth waking up for. The Amish did not abandon lard because it stopped working. They never abandoned it at all. And the women in these communities who bake 4 days a week have not spent a significant amount on cooking fat in years. That is habit number 1, and it sets the tone for everything else on this list. But here is where it gets even more interesting, because saving money on fat is one thing. What the Amish do with the parts of an animal that most Americans throw directly in the trash, that is something else entirely. The average American family buys a rotisserie chicken, pulls the meat off, and throws the carcass away. Maybe they feel a little guilty about it. Most don't think twice. The Amish would look at that carcass and see at least 3 more meals. This is the habit that, when you really sit with it, changes the entire way you think about what food is. Every time you cook meat with bones, a whole chicken, a beef shank, a pork neck, a lamb shoulder, those bones are not scraps. They are the beginning of something else. The Amish know this the way they know how to read the weather. It is not a technique, it is a reflex. What you do is this. After the meal, the bones go into a pot with cold water, a splash of vinegar to pull the minerals from the marrow. Whatever vegetable scraps are around, an onion half, a carrot end, a celery leaf, and you let it simmer, low and slow, 4 hours, 6 hours, Overnight, if you have a wood stove and you are Amish, and time moves differently for you, what comes out is a broth so rich it gels in the refrigerator. That is the collagen. That is the stuff that costs $40 a jar at the health food store, pre-packaged and labeled with a fancy name. That broth becomes the base for the next soup. It becomes the liquid you cook your rice in, which means your rice now tastes like a meal on its own. It becomes the base for a pan sauce when you need something on the table fast. One chicken, bought once, feeds a family 5 different ways across a week. The Amish are not being dramatic about frugality. They are being mathematical. And the math is brutal in how clearly it shows what we have been leaving on the table, or rather, throwing in the bin. A family that starts making broth from their bones consistently will find within a month that their grocery bill has a gap in it where the soups and broths used to be. That gap does not come back. That is what this habit does. Now, the bones and the broth are about extracting maximum value from what you already bought. The next habit is about something different. It is about refusing to let the end of the season be a loss. Most people with a garden have had this experience. October comes, the first frost is on its way, and there are still green tomatoes on the vine, peppers that never quite ripened, half a head of cabbage, a few onions that did not get pulled in time, and unless you know what to do with all of it at once, most of it goes to waste. The season ends, and a portion of everything you grew just quietly dies. The Amish have a name for what they do instead. They call it chow chow. It is a relish, bright, sweet, tangy, a little sharp, made from exactly those late-season vegetables that would otherwise be lost. Green tomatoes, peppers, onions, carrots, cauliflower, cabbage, whatever is left in the garden before the cold comes in, everything gets chopped, salted, rinsed, cooked down in a brine of vinegar and sugar and spices, and sealed in jars. And then it sits on the shelf all winter, adding flavor and acidity to heavy meals when everything outside is gray and cold. Chow chow is not a recipe. It is a philosophy in edible form. It is the Amish answer to the question of what to do when something is about to be lost. And the answer is always the same. Preserve it, store it, make it into something that lasts. The garden does not end in October in an Amish kitchen. October is when the last of the garden gets put away. You can make a version of this with anything that is about to turn in your refrigerator too. It does not require a garden. Cucumbers that are getting soft, peppers that are a day away from going bad, the end of an onion bag. Chow chow is forgiving. It wants the imperfect and the leftover. That is the entire point. Now, before we go further, I want to mention something. If you are drawn to this way of thinking about food, traditional practices, ancestral techniques, making your kitchen more self-sufficient, I put together resources that go much deeper than any single video can. Recipes, guides, the kind of knowledge that used to get passed down in person. All of it is at ancestralbeauty.shop. I will leave the link below. Now, back to the list. The next habit is one that most people know about in theory, but very few actually do. And the reason they do not do it is that they are thinking about it the wrong way. Buying meat directly from a farmer, half a hog, a quarter of a cow, a whole lamb, sounds like something that requires a chest freezer, a large family, and more money up front than most people want to commit to at once. The Amish do not frame it that way. They frame it as the only sensible way to buy meat. because they have done the math that most consumers never bother to do. Here is that math. A pound of ground beef at the grocery store right now costs somewhere between $5 and $8 depending on where you live. A pound of ribeye costs considerably more, but when you buy a quarter of a grass-fed cow directly from a rancher, you pay somewhere between $4 and $7 per pound, and that price covers every cut: the ribeye, the chuck, the brisket, the ground beef, the soup bones, the oxtail, everything. One price across the whole animal. The upfront cost feels large, but divide it out and it is almost always less than what you pay buying piece by piece at retail prices, cut by cut, every week for months. The Amish figured this out not because they are particularly clever, but because they live close enough to the source that the comparison is obvious. They know the farmer, they know what the animal costs to raise, and they know that the markup between farm and supermarket shelf is where most of their food budget used to disappear. You do not need a farm for this. You need a chest freezer and a connection to one local producer. Farmers markets, local farm websites, community-supported agriculture programs, all of them offer versions of this. It is the single largest structural change you can make to your grocery budget, and it is exactly what the Amish have always done. The next habit is one where the Amish are unknowingly ahead of a conversation that modern science is only now catching up to, and it involves a jar of cabbage. Fermentation was not a health trend in Amish homes. It was just Tuesday. Sauerkraut, pickled beets, cucumber pickles, kefir made from raw milk. These are not specialty items in an Amish kitchen. They are condiments. They are what is already on the table when you sit down, and they have been on that table for generations, long before anyone used the word probiotic. Here is the economic part of this that tends to surprise people. A jar of probiotic supplements, the kind marketed for gut health, immune support, energy, costs $30, $40, sometimes $60 a month. A head of cabbage costs $1, maybe $1.50. Shredded, salted, packed into a jar, and left on the counter for 3 to 5 days, that cabbage becomes sauerkraut with a bacterial count that most commercial probiotics cannot match. The fermentation produces live cultures. The refrigerator ones you buy in capsule form are far less reliably alive by the time you take them. The Amish never needed the supplements because they never stopped eating the fermented foods. And when you start making sauerkraut at home, or fermented pickles, or a simple beet kvass, or homemade kefir, you will notice something within a few weeks that is difficult to articulate but very easy to feel. Your digestion changes, your energy is more consistent. This is the thing your great-grandmother would not have been able to explain in scientific terms, but knew to be true in her body. 1 jar of sauerkraut per week made at home replaces a supplement habit that costs most people several $100s a year. That is the Amish math again, quiet, consistent, and completely unimpressed with the modern alternative. Now, none of this works without bread, and the Amish relationship with bread is one of the most instructive things about how they think about food in general. They bake, not occasionally, not as a weekend project, not when the mood strikes. They bake on a schedule in large batches because that is the only version of baking that makes sense at scale. 4 loaves instead of 1, 2 dozen biscuits instead of 6, a sheet of cinnamon rolls that gets wrapped and frozen before anyone can eat it all at once, A loaf of decent bread at the grocery store costs $5 to $8. A loaf of homemade bread costs under $1 in ingredients: flour, water, salt, yeast, or sourdough starter. If you bake 4 loaves in a single session, you have spent the time of one bake to produce a month's worth of bread because the extras go directly into the freezer. The oven is already hot. The flour is already out. The additional loaves cost almost nothing extra in time or energy. The Amish bake this way because large families made it necessary. But the math works just as well for smaller households, better actually, because the freezer extends the value without requiring you to eat 4 loaves in a week. And the bread you make at home has something the store bread does not have, regardless of what the label says. It has 2 or 3 ingredients, not 40. It does not go stale on day 2 because it is not engineered to. It is real food made in a kitchen by a person who knows what went into it. This is the habit that is the most immediately actionable of everything on this list. You can start this week. The learning curve is not as steep as people think. And the first time you pull a loaf out of the oven that cost you 80 cents and tastes better than anything you have ever bought, something shifts. You stop buying bread. Just like that. When the Amish butcher a hog, nothing is planned for the trash. Not the fat, that becomes lard. Not the bones, those go into broth. Not the scraps, the trimmings, the neck meat, the bits and pieces that are not pretty enough to be a roast or a chop. Those become scrapple. Scrapple is one of those foods that sounds unappealing until you eat it, and then you understand why Pennsylvania Dutch communities have been making it for 300 years. It is the scraps of pork, the hocks, the neck, the odds and ends, simmered until tender in their own broth, then finally chopped and returned to that reduced broth, which is then thickened with cornmeal and seasoned with sage and black pepper and let to cool in a loaf pan until it sets firm. Then it gets sliced and fried in, you guessed it, lard, until the outside is crackling and golden and the inside is soft and dense and deeply savory. It lasts for weeks in a cold cellar or a refrigerator. It costs almost nothing to make if you have the scraps. And it is, in every sense, the expression of a food culture that decided at some point that wasting any part of an animal was not just economically foolish, but morally wrong. The animal gave its life. The least you could do was use all of it. We do not have that culture anymore. We have boneless, skinless chicken breasts in a plastic tray, and we throw the bones away. We have pork loin, and we wonder what to do with the drippings. Scrapple is not asking you to be Amish. It is asking you to look at what you have and see further than the obvious first use. The Amish do not shop the way most Americans shop. They do not wander a supermarket aisle choosing between 17 varieties of the same grain. They go to a bulk food store, often Amish run, and they buy 50 pounds of flour, 25 pounds of rolled oats, 10 pounds of dried beans, 5 pounds of rice, all at once, all at a price per pound that is a fraction of what the same product costs in a branded bag on a grocery shelf. The key thing they do that most people who try bulk buying get wrong is the rotation. They do not just buy large quantities and hope for the best. They buy what they will consume within a defined window, 3 months, 6 months, and they replenish before they run out, not after. It is a revolving pantry, not a stockpile. The difference matters because the reason most people fail at bulk buying is that they buy too much of something they use too little of, and then it goes stale or gets infested and they lose money instead of saving it. When your pantry works as a system, your grocery shopping changes fundamentally. You stop buying the small bag of flour every 2 weeks at full retail price. You stop running out of things and making emergency trips that always cost more than planned. You shop for fresh produce and protein. The staples are already home, already paid for, already waiting. Every kitchen that ever fried bacon in a cast iron pan produced something that most modern cooks pour down the drain. The rendered fat that collects in the pan after the bacon is done. Golden, smoky, savory. The Amish keep a small tin or jar near the stove, and every bit of that fat goes into it. Bacon grease, pork drippings from a roast, the fat that pools in the bottom of the pan after you cook sausage. That jar becomes an ingredient. You use it to fry eggs. You use it to saute onions that then taste like they took twice as long to cook as they actually did. You use it to make the most remarkable roasted potatoes you have ever had. You use it to season a cast iron pan. You use it in cornbread. It is fat you already paid for once, that you would otherwise throw away, that has more flavor than any oil you could buy. The Amish save it because waste is waste, even at that small A scale. And when you start saving it too, you will find yourself reaching for it constantly because it makes everything better and it costs nothing beyond the discipline of keeping a small tin by the stove. Most of you have probably heard the idea of planning meals for a week. The Amish think that is charming, in the way that a short-distance runner would find a 5-kilometer training plan charming. They plan for a year, not day by day, but seasonally. What will be harvested in July needs to be thought about in March. What will be canned in September needs jars purchased in August. What the family will eat in January depends on what was put up in October. The entire food system of an Amish household runs on a calendar that follows the land, not the supermarket circular. For most people, this kind of thinking feels overwhelming, but it does not have to mean planning every meal for 12 months. It means asking one simple question before each season changes. What is cheap and abundant right now, and how much of it can I preserve for later? In summer, that might be tomatoes and zucchini. In fall, squash and apples. In winter, dried beans and root vegetables that stored well. When you buy food in season at peak abundance, it costs a fraction of what it costs out of season. The Amish are simply disciplined about eating what the land offers when it offers it and storing the rest. And finally, there is the root cellar. Most people think of it as a relic, something from before refrigerators existed, now replaced by modern technology. The Amish think of it as a second refrigerator that never needs to be plugged in. The principle is simple. A space that stays consistently cool between 32 and 50 degrees, dark and moderately humid, will preserve root vegetables, hard squash, apples, cabbages, and onions for months without any electricity at all. Potatoes last 4 to 6 months. Carrots even longer if stored in damp sand. Winter squash can sit in a cool corner of a pantry from October to February without spoiling. You do not need to build an underground cellar, a corner of an unheated garage in winter, a cool basement room, a large cooler with ice checked weekly. All of these approximate the conditions well enough to dramatically extend the life of produce you buy in bulk during harvest season. The Amish buy or grow large quantities in the fall because they know they have a place to put it that is not the refrigerator. That knowledge changes what is worth buying and when and how much. The final habit is the one that ties all of this together, and it is the simplest of the 12, which is maybe why it is the one that has been most completely lost. The Amish do not have leftovers in the way that most Americans do. They do not have a Tuesday dinner that becomes a sad Tuesday dinner again on Wednesday night, microwaved and eaten standing over the sink with low enthusiasm. They have ingredients. Tuesday's roasted potatoes are Wednesday morning's hash. The broth from Sunday's chicken is the base of Monday's soup. The last of the bread that is getting dry becomes a bread pudding or a savory stuffing or a pile of croutons that goes on top of a salad. This is not about eating the same thing twice. It is about seeing everything in your refrigerator as a first stage, not a finished product. The meal you cooked is not the end of that food's life. It is one stop along the way. The Amish cook this way because waste is not an option, and because they learned from women who understood that a kitchen is a system, inputs and outputs, nothing leaving unnecessarily, everything finding its next form. The EPA estimates the average American household throws away nearly $3,000 worth of food every year. The Amish number is almost certainly a fraction of that, not because they eat less, but because they eat more completely. They eat the whole thing, every bone, every dripping, every leftover, every garden scrap, every end of a loaf. 12 habits, all of them old, all of them practical, all of them available to you right now in your kitchen with the food you already have. 12 habits. Lard over industrial oils, bones into broth, garden scraps into chow chow, whole animals over individual cuts, fermentation instead of supplements, batch baking, scrapple, bulk grains, saved drippings, seasonal planning, the root cellar pantry, and leftovers that never really end. They just become something else. None of this is complicated. All of it was normal not long ago. The Amish did not invent frugality. They just never stopped practicing it. If you want to go deeper into the ancestral kitchen practices we cover here, visit ancestralbeauty.shop. The link is right below this video. And if this changed the way you think about your kitchen, share it with someone whose grocery bill could use the help.